Hello everybody, this is the Empirical Audiophile. And what I want to talk to you about something I saw for sale. It's called cryogenic tubes. Now, cryogenically freezing tubes is nothing new. We did it back in the late 70s and 80s. We would send our tubes out and get them cryogenically frozen and then get them back. There's now a company that sells cryogenic tubes already done for you. But let me tell you something that could save you a lot of money. It depends on if you get cryogenic tubes, if you can hear a difference or not. Because a lot of people got tubes cryogenically done, and they said they heard a difference. I went and did it to a pair of 6550 Western Electric 6550s for my Conrad Johnson amp, and I had a spare set, so as those were being cryogenically frozen, the spare set I used. And when I got them back and put them back in, I can't really say I heard a huge difference or anything. I just being honest with you. I never did it again. But let me tell you a little something. You know, when I was studying to be a aerospace engineer, you had to go through an apprenticeship, tool and die apprenticeship. And you have to be certified with the state. At least I had to be certified with the state that I was in, which is the state of Illinois. I had to be certified. So I had to go through an apprenticeship, tool and die apprenticeship. And when you go into an apprenticeship, to actually have hands-on experience, which is very good for an engineer to have hands-on experience with working with metal. The one thing they would have apprentices do is make what they call parallels. Parallels come in different heights, and you put them in a vise, and you can put stuff in the vise to be held, and the parallel itself would give you the height you wanted the piece to stick out of the vise. So they would have you make a set of these. They would usually make these parallels out of A2. Now, A2 or D2. Now, A2 or D2 is considered to be in the stainless steel family. It's high chrome, high carbon steel. And if you remember in the old King Kong movie, the old black and white one, where the guy talking about the chains that King Kong has, high chrome, high carbon steel, so don't worry, you can't break through them. High chrome and high carbon steel is very strong because it is high chrome, high carbon. But there's a problem with such steels like A2, S7. These steels have a tendency to grow. They're not stable. And what happens if you may have to get them heat treated, you may have to get them drawn, you may have to get them frozen and drawn again, or heat treated. So what you would do when you're an apprentice, you make yourself a set of these parallels and you green grind them. Green grinding only means you're roughing them out, grinding them, roughing them out. Then you would send them all out to heat treat. And let's say they're made out of A2. And when you got them back, okay, they're very close to size of what you want. And we would take them and then put them in a freezer, the parallels, to help stabilize the molecules of the steel, especially if you're using A2 or D2. And the journeyman would say, just let them sit in there for 6 months, whatever. Don't worry about them, because the freezer in the shop I was in was set to very, very cold. You know, like a deep freeze. And a deep freeze is like 0 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a very deep. And we all know about deep freezers. You put ice cream in there, and it's like a brick when it comes out. You can't even dig a spoon. You bend the spoon. The ice cream so frozen, like in 10 below 0. So we would put the steel in there that helps stabilize the molecules of the steel. Well, you can do the same thing with your cables and with your tubes. Let's say you go out and you buy a tube amplifier, you name what tubes you're buying, 300B, EL37s, whatever, 6550, KT88. You buy an amplifier and you buy an extra set of tubes. Or you have cable lying around that you're not using, but you may want to use in the future. What you can do with that to help stabilize the molecules of the tube is put it in a deep freezer and just let it sit, and take your cables, put them all in a deep freezer and let them sit until the day you need them. That's basically what cryogenic freezing is doing. It's stabilizing the molecules of the steel so it doesn't expand and contract. Like today, I still have that set of parallels, and it's the same size it was when I made them over 40 years ago. In other words, they don't grow. You've got to have stabilization of your steel, because let's say you're doing things so accurate that you cannot have your parallels heat up and one go higher than the other. You have to have them perfectly flat and stable. So whatever you put in there stays stable, because you may be holding tolerances of maybe, 1 or 2 microns, which is less than a tenth of an inch, 10,000ths of an inch, 1 or 2 microns. So you can't have vices or parallels that are going to be growing. And this is very typical in the tool and die trade. You can have a die block that will come in and you can grind it all up precision. And you'll put it in the die, and by the time you put it in the die, the thing's expanding because of a little bit of temperature change. Doesn't take a lot of temperature change to start knocking things out by tenths of an inch. And a lot of companies go through a lot of problems because these big die blocks will start expanding and the holes will start going out of location, and you can't have that. You got to certify a die for the customer, and it's got to be right on the money. Let's say if it's plus 2/10, minus nothing, or plus or minus 2/10, it's got to fall within that tolerance that die does. So it's got to be certified before it goes into the press. So the steel all has to be stabilized. By freezing it is one way of doing it. There are other ways of stabilizing steel, where they would take the steel and put it on a plate, a metal plate with legs on it, and they had a special device they would put on it that would send micro vibrations through the steel, believe it or not, to help stabilize that steel. And they'd let it run on that plate and clamp it down on the plate, put this device on that had these micro vibrations, and let it go an hour or two to help stabilize the molecules of the steel. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of trying to stabilize steel, but it's extremely important when you're an engineer or you're a tool and die maker making dies, and the progression has to stay right there. I made dies that were over 4 foot, 5 foot in length, and the progression had to stay from end to end within 50 millionths of an inch. Wasn't even a tenth. It could only expand no more than 50 millionths of an inch for over 4 foot length. That is very, very close tolerance if you've never worked with it. One way of doing it also was to take steel and put it in the freezer to help stabilize it. That's an inexpensive way. So if you are thinking about or have seen these new cryogenic tubes and you think to yourself, wow, they're kind of expensive, I don't want to go that route, you can take all the tubes you got, if you have spares, and throw them in your freezer until the day you need them. And that will stabilize the molecules of the steel that is inside that tube. It's an old trick that the tool and die industry does. Okay, it works. Believe me, I have steel and I have vices and I have V blocks that are as accurate as they were 40, 45 years ago. Just as accurate because the steel has been stabilized and not to grow, because the worst thing you can do is have something that's got to have a TIR, which means total indicator reading, of no more than 2/10 TIR, total indicator reading. And there's nothing worse than trying to hold that kind of precision and having your vise or whatever move and start moving on you and throw the OD and the ID, throw the ID off from the OD. Okay, there's nothing worse than you're grinding something and have it move, because then it's garbage, because you have to hold a tolerance of 2/10 TIR, total indicator reading. Okay, so it does work. So if you want to do it yourself, just grab all your tubes and your cabling, and since you're not using them and they're spares, throw them in the deep freeze and let them sit there until the day you need them. They're spare, and they may sit in the freezer for years, perfectly fine. It helps stabilize the steel. So until next time, happy listening, and this is the Empirical Audiophile. I hope I gave you a little hint of maybe it will improve your music. You never know. Maybe your ears are far better than mine, or your system is far better than my system. Oh, and if you were looking and you're seeing an empty spot right here, the Conrad Johnson amp and preamp is on the bottom. I'm getting a new integrated amplifier coming in. It'll be in next week, and that's what this space is for, the new integrated amp. And the Conrad Johnson is just sitting on the bottom of the shelf. So I will be comparing the brand new integrated amp with the Conrad Johnson amp and preamp, the 11A and the Premier 10. So until next time, happy listening.